So I am Grace Ann. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Vice President of the UNL chapter here as an RSO on campus. So welcome to Ratio Christi. If you meant to be here, you're in the right place. We have food over there if you didn't see it before, or if you want it, you can go grab some food. Sorry, I'm reading from the list of announcements. So we have been doing a thing this semester where we go to dinner before we come here. So we meet at 6 o'clock at various restaurants. Today we're at Chipotle. Next week we will have a spot. We haven't picked it out yet, but that will be posted on our Facebook page. So we have social media. Facebook is one of them. You can find us at facebook.com/RatioChristiUNL. We also have a YouTube page where we are live streaming our meetings now, and we are also on Instagram. If you want to get a formal introduction to what we're talking about each week, we have an email list that you can sign up for at the back table over there, and you can get video instructions if there are any for that week, introduction to what the topic is, and more information just about Ratio Christi. Also on that back table, we have flyers for our monthly meetings and our weekly meetings. So this semester, we're talking about who is Jesus. Last semester, last school year, we were doing did God exist? So we're talking about questions that are related to who is Jesus? Did he exist? What did he say? Can we rely on what he said? This semester, we're also doing things called RC Monthly. So the second Monday of every month, we will be having a monthly meeting. The first one was this past Monday, and we talked about, is faith reasonable? This next month, we'll be talking about, did God exist? If you want to go to those, they're also at 7:30, but they're on Mondays at Brace Hall on campus, and there's flyers at that back table still talking about how to get there and what we'll be talking about at those events. Feel free to grab some flyers, bring them to friends, invite people who want to come. Ooh, it's on now. Invite people to Ratio Christi who might be interested in apologetics from your church classes, in your dorms, wherever you're living, just to get the word out about who we are and what apologetics actually is. We are also planning on ordering some t-shirts that have the Ratio Christi logo on them. If you want a t-shirt, let any of us know. Joel, Matt, myself, Adam, or Wesley that are in the back, and we can get you down for that. There would be $10 for the t-shirt. If you are a student at UNL, sorry, there's a lot of announcements. If you are a student at UNL, you can become a member of Ratio Christi officially, and that is for administrative purposes, voting on things like the board, and if we want to go particular directions with Ratio Christi, that is the way that you can have an influence on that. So you can talk to any of the 5 of us that I mentioned earlier about getting into that. As I mentioned earlier, our theme this semester has been Who is Jesus? And we're going to be continuing talking about that today with more formal evidence arguments, there we go, for who was he, and our topic is going to be more, did Jesus believe he was God? And so we're going to be talking about Jesus in relation to God and if they are the same person. So I'm going to pass it over to Adam, who is our speaker, typically every weeknight, to talk to you guys.
All right, well, one thing that I always like to do is give a shout out to University Church. They allow us to meet here. This used to be, if you've never heard this before, this used to be a boxing gym down here. So last year, University Church took it over and redesigned it to be a church, and I love it. I think it's great what they did with the atmosphere here. But one of the jokes that the church used to use at first was, all right, the first rule about Fight Church is that we always talk about Fight Church. So if you're looking for a church, if you're new to Lincoln, I would highly recommend University Church. They meet right here at Course at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. All right, as Grace said, our theme last semester was the existence of God. We spent the whole semester looking at arguments for the existence of God, and we considered some arguments against God and how we as Christians would respond to that. We as in Ratio Christi. And if you consider just for a moment that there's a sense in which there's three major types of belief systems, right? There's theistic belief systems who believe in a supreme being of some sorts. There are pantheistic belief systems where they think that the universe is God or that God is in the universe. That's panentheism. And then a third type of belief system, some form of atheism. And there's, just like the other two, there's several different types or forms of atheistic belief systems. And atheism, just the word or the letter A in front of it, just means non-theism or a non-theist. They don't believe that there is a God. So if we did our job well, if we were successful in arguing last semester that there is a supreme being, there's a sense in which we've eliminated then all of these types of belief systems. So our goal, if you think of a cumulative case, is we're trying to get at the truth. We're trying to get at what is real. What is the correct belief system, if you will? Which one corresponds to reality? So by making an argument for a supreme being, making all those arguments, making that case, we've kind of narrowed it down then to just theistic belief systems. So now we might ask the question, which of these then are true? Among the different conceptions of God within theism, which one understands God correctly? And of course there's more than just these three. Plato, Aristotle, Baha'i is not up here. There are other theistic belief systems, but these are the big three that we often talk about. So there's a sense in which we've eliminated all of these belief systems on the right, and now we're down to just theistic belief systems. I just wanted to remind you of that. This is where we've kind of moved conceptually from last semester to this semester. So we're asking the question now, of all the theistic belief systems, which one understands God correctly? And of course, as a Christian organization, a Christian ministry, that is Ratio Christi, we're making the case that Christianity is true. And I think the easiest or maybe the simplest way to do that is simply just to argue that Jesus, in fact, is that supreme being. Because that's really the major distinction between us as Christians, Christian theists, and other type of theistic belief systems. The major distinction, major distinctive that we have as Christians is we have certain beliefs about this supreme being. Namely, we think that Jesus is that supreme being. So I wanted to start you off with a question. If you're new to Ratio Christi, one thing that we like to do is I teach maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then I throw out a discussion question for you guys to talk among one another at your table, just to kind of get the conversation going, hear from one another, your thoughts, different positions. So here's the question I want to throw out to have you guys discuss at your table first tonight. We're talking about different religions, right? And we're trying to make the case for our belief system, Christianity. What if somebody said to you, well, all religions have some truth. Oftentimes this is presented when, let's say we're trying to make a case for Christianity, that we think other people should trust in Christ or believe that Christianity is true. Sometimes we get an objection to that like this. They'll respond to us or object to what we're doing by saying something like, well, why are you arguing for Christianity? Why do you care so much about that, or getting other people to think that Christianity is true? All religions have some truth. So how would you respond to that if somebody gave you that objection? Talk about that at your tables for just a few minutes here. Well, these are one of those statements that, the way I describe this statement, and there's a lot of statements like this, They're true, but not very interesting. It's a true statement, but it's not a very interesting statement. One of the easiest ways that I've found to just get this conversation to go in a good or the right direction, I think, is to ask the person, does Nazism have some truth? And I think it does. I'm not an expert on Nazism, but I remember having to read Mein Kampf in high school, and there were certain things that I agreed with in there. For example, I would assume that Nazis would say that rape is wrong. So yeah, maybe there is some truth in Nazism, but does that mean that Nazism is okay? Well, no, of course not. Why? Because when it comes to the important issues or the main issues, they're horrendously wrong, right? So maybe even though they might have some things that are correct or true within their belief system of Nazism, their major or their core stances are horrendous. And that's why we would want to reject it and fight against its ideology. And I think a similar case can be made when it comes to religion. Now, oftentimes what people mean by this, or what they're trying to invoke by this, is that for them, the core issue is being a good person. And so if all the different religions, for the most part, are encouraging people to be better human beings, then in that sense, they're all equal and they're all true and they should all be celebrated. However, I don't know if that's the core or most important aspect of the different religions. Even if it was the case that they all, let's say I grant the argument that yes, all religions encourage and teach people to be better human beings, but is that the most or the core or the critical thing about the religions? It would seem to me that whether there is a supreme being or not might be more core or more important than encouraging people to be good. And if there is a supreme being, how do we reconcile, or how do we get along with, or commune, or be friends with this supreme being? How are we to interact with this supreme being? That seems more core or more central to these various belief systems. So that's how the conversation often goes. But it's good to kind of think through how you might respond to some of these things. So what we're saying, well, let me say what we're not saying. We're not saying that all these belief systems are wrong in all aspects. No, most of them would say that murder and rape are evil, and we would affirm that. So we're not saying that they're all wrong in everything they believe. What we're saying, respectfully and kindly, is that we think they're wrong when it comes to their view of God or the supreme being, or they're incorrect in their understanding of how we can be reconciled back to this supreme being. So again, the focus of this semester then is making the case that Jesus is this supreme being. I think that's the key distinction between our belief system and other theistic belief systems. So instead of spending our semester looking at all these other belief systems, we will spend a semester doing that in the future. This semester, though, at least, we're going to focus on making the case that Jesus is God. Now, I'm going to do this with two arguments, or you could call them two approaches to making this case. Okay, two lines of evidence, if you will. I think approaches is a better distinguisher. So two approaches to argue that Jesus is God. Now, I've told you a little bit about the first one, and I apologize. This font is way too small. I know those of you in the back might have a hard time reading this tonight, but basically what I'm going to do through this black screen is lay out the entire argument for the semester. I find it very helpful, no matter what I'm teaching, to give the folks, students, class, whatever it is, to give them right at the beginning a map to follow, kind of where we're going, how we're going to build this argument, so they can start thinking of the flow of the premises, the flow of the logic from point to point. So I lay everything out at the beginning, and then we'll slowly go through the rest of the semester, premise by premise, making our case. So one thing that I want to do tonight for you is kind of lay out this first approach, or this first argument. You'll see at the bottom there of the screen the second argument. And that's something we'll probably only spend a week or two on at the end of the semester. So the majority of our time this semester will be spent on this first argument, or this first approach. As I said before, this is a well-known approach in the sense that not only he, but others have taken this approach. But one of the well-known figures in history who took this approach was none other than John Locke. You might have heard that name before. He's a very famous Enlightenment philosopher, Enlightenment thinker from the 1700s. So John Locke is one big name, if you will, in history who took this approach, making the case that Jesus is God. There's many others, but I always throw out John Locke's name because most people recognize him. Okay, so with this Lockean argument, if you will, the first argument, I think the most pertinent question to start out with is this. Did the man Jesus even exist? Before we even begin to try to make an argument that this man, Jesus of Nazareth, was God, the first thing we need to tackle is, did he even exist? Did this human being, Jesus, exist 2,000 years ago? Because there are folks out there, maybe you've encountered them, maybe you've read some of their stuff online. There are folks who claim that Jesus never even existed, that he completely, even as a human being, it was a myth or a legend that developed, that he as a human being never even existed. Now, honestly, I'm not going to spend much time on this, because even though you'll find this at a popular level sometimes, this argument that Jesus never existed, at an academic level or a scholarly level, there's virtually nobody who holds this. There's virtually nobody, prove me wrong, but as far as I'm aware, and I've heard from many others in this field, Christians and non-Christians, tell me, and I haven't seen it myself either, so it's an empirical observation that I'm making, prove me wrong with a counterexample, but I don't think there's any scholar, historian, New Testament scholar, who claims this, that Jesus just did not exist. As we'll see throughout the semester, there's so much extra biblical evidence, historical evidence, archaeological evidence outside the Bible that at least at a minimum affirms the existence of Jesus, that this, dealing with this issue is almost a waste of time. I'll get you a question in just a second.
He's kind of famous for having this argument.
I think I know who you're talking about. He's not a historian or a New Testament scholar. I think he's a German linguist, if I remember right.
He's a New Testament scholar.
Okay. Well, give me some details and prove me wrong.
Yeah.
But what I usually give folks, or what I usually direct people to who at a popular level think that this is a real thing among scholars, is this book. So Bart Ehrman is an atheist, okay? He's a New Testament scholar at NC Chapel Hill in North Carolina. So he's a university New Testament scholar, professor, an atheist. And he got so tired at a popular level of people asking him and arguing with him that the historical Jesus didn't even exist, that he finally just wrote a book about it and laid out all the evidence, extra biblical evidence that this Jesus person did exist. So that's what I usually just refer folks to is that book. And again, he's an atheist, he's not a Christian, He doesn't have a dog in this fight, if you will. And he's just laying out, he doesn't believe that Jesus was God. He's just laying out all the historical evidence that Jesus existed. So I'm not really going to spend any more time on that, because as you'll see throughout the rest of the semester, we'll be looking at all sorts of historical evidences about Jesus, extra biblical evidences that will confirm this first point. And I don't think it's worthwhile jumping ahead to cover those things. The next question I think is worthwhile to ask in this first approach is, did Jesus himself claim to be God? Again, there's another belief out there, another idea out there, that Jesus himself never claimed to be God, that he taught moral things, that he did good things for people, that he was just a good moral teacher, but never himself claimed to be God. That this was an idea that his followers later developed. Maybe after he died, or even while he was alive, his followers came up with this idea, but he himself never claimed to be God. And to deal with that question, I want to show you a video. It's about 5-6 minute video, so take a look at this. Now, it's one thing, right, for somebody to claim that they're God. I mean, certainly more than people than just Jesus have done that in history, that have claimed to be God. Anybody can claim that, right? The key thing is their claim true, right? Why would we think that, even though I believe there's some good historical evidence that Jesus existed, that he claimed to be God, I think the heart of the matter is, though, why should we believe his claim? And we're moving through this pretty quick, and you'll see why. We're going to get more to the heart of the evidence in the coming weeks. But I want to take you through this process, which I think is the correct, logical way to think through these issues. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys now, again at the table, to talk for a few minutes. First of all, do you believe Jesus' claim to be God? Do you think he was telling the truth? And then, regardless of how you answer, yes or no, how would you defend your answer? If you say, yeah, I think Jesus was right, I think he was God, well, what led you to that belief? Or how would you defend that belief? If you might be here tonight and say, no, I don't think Jesus was God, how would you defend that answer? What would lead you to believe that Jesus isn't the supreme being? So I'll let you guys talk about that at your table for a few minutes here. All right. Well, this is where we're really going to see John Locke's contribution, if you will, to this conversation. This is what he's most well known for in terms of this conversation. In terms of answering this question, why should we believe Jesus' claim? And I think it's the right approach, but according to John Locke and others, the key evidence that backs up his claim that he was God is his miracles. So why should we believe Jesus' claim that he is God? I would say there the right answer is, bottom line, his miracles. His miracles. So I'll just give you an example, a silly example. If somebody came up to me on the street and said that they were God, or let's say they had a friend, Josh, who claimed to be God, I would be highly skeptical of them. And I think we should be, right? We shouldn't be gullible. We shouldn't be naive. But at the same time, if we believe that there is a supreme being, I think we should be at least open to the idea that this friend, Josh, might be God. I would be highly skeptical, but I couldn't rule it out completely. What I would want is good reasons and evidence to think that Josh is God, right? And to me, and I think to most people, one thing that I would find very convincing would be if Josh could do miracles. Now, if this person on the street just told me that Josh did miracles, I would still be skeptical because I would want to see some evidence for these miracles. I mean, ideally, it would be great to actually see one with my own eyes, but maybe this guy, Josh, lived 100 years ago or something, and I can't see the miracles with my own eyes. But maybe, this person on the street says that there's some good historical evidence that other people saw these miracles, archaeological evidence, whatever. They could provide some sort of evidence. I might not be convinced on the spot. I would want to see that evidence, right, for myself, but at least he's got my attention now. And it seems to me this is the exact same process that the disciples went through, right? You remember doubting Thomas. You remember John the Baptist who had doubts. Seems like a lot of his disciples doubted whether he was really God or not. But Jesus, time and time again, referred those who were struggling with believing he really was God. Jesus referred them to the miraculous works that he was doing as evidence for his claim to be God. So I think bottom line is his miracles. His miracles back up his claim that he is God. And if you think about it, it seems to me that is the very purpose of miracles. I want to talk a little bit tonight about that term, miracle. I want to give a little bit more of a precise definition for it so that we're using it consistently in this conversation. I find that the term miracle is one of those words that we use for a lot of things. Like when my children were born. My wife and I described it as a miracle, and I think that's appropriate. But that's not the way we're using miracle tonight, okay? So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about precisely in this conversation how we're using the term miracle. I take a step back here at this point often in the conversation or in the argument. I think to myself, if there is a God, we made a good case for God, I think. I'm compelled, I find it the case compelling that there is a supreme being. It seems reasonable to think that if there is at least a personal supreme being out there, that he would want to communicate to us. But it would be a difficult situation for us when all sorts of people, and this is where we find ourselves in, if all sorts of different people throughout history claim to have messages from this supreme being, how do we know which ones are really from him and which ones aren't? Because some of these so-called messages from God are contradictory. So you would think right from the surface they can't all be from God. So how do we know which ones really are from God? Well, it seems to make a lot of sense to me that miracles would perform that function. Miracles would perform that function that would give evidence, if you will, that this XYZ message really is from God. In other words, make it simple. Two guys on the street come up to me. I'm going out to eat. I'm going to Laszlo's. Two guys run up to me, both claiming to have a message from God, but their messages are contradictory. So I know one of them must be lying. How do I know which one's lying? If one can do miracles and the other one can't, well, I'm putting my chips over here, right? All else being equal. Now, I know we don't want to be naive, gullible. We should check these miracles out. Maybe they're duping us. Maybe they're illusionists, professional illusionists. Those guys are really good at what they do. I think it's worthwhile to spend a lot of time evaluating it. But all else being equal, I would go with a guy who can do miracles. And that doesn't seem to be just an intuition of mine either. I mean, how many stories have you heard of even non-theists, atheists, a lot of conversations I've been a part of, who have said things like, look, if God would do X, Y, Z right now in this room, I would believe. Right? Have you heard that? I mean, that seems to be a very strong intuition that we have this epistemological intuition built into us, that if a miraculous thing was done, that would be a good reason to believe God is real, or that God is trying to communicate to us. Okay? So that's the case I'm trying to make here about miracles, that miracles serve the purpose of authenticating the message. It kind of works like almost like a signature or a fingerprint, or in years past, a signet ring. You know, in years past, when a king wanted to send a letter or make a new law, but he wanted to prove to everybody who received it that it really was from the king, that it wasn't a counterfeit, he would have a signet ring. And it was unique to him, dip it in wax, and then press it upon that letter as a seal of authenticity that this law or letter was really from the king. So it had to be unique. It couldn't have been replicated. Not anybody could do this. It had to be recognizable, something that only the king could do, and people would know that this had to be from the king because it has this pressed into it. And I would say that that is the purpose of miracles. They perform that same function. They're unique, they're easily recognizable as long as we authenticate them, right? And then they serve that purpose of evidence that a message really is from God. In other words, the miracle confirms the message, or the sign confirms the sermon, however you want to put it. And this is, for those of us in the room that are Christians, this is actually what we see throughout the Bible. Sometimes people have the idea that the Bible is just full of miracles, that there's just all these crazy supernatural things happening all the time. But really, that's not the case at all. If you think about it for a moment, the Bible was written over a period of 1,500 years. And somebody's gone through and done the work. There's around 250 miracles recorded in the Bible. Okay? So if you do the math real quick, those of you engineers in the room probably already done this. But if you do the math, on average, that means one miracle every 6 years. That's not, miracles and supernatural weird things happening all the time. That's fairly unique. Because if you think about it, if miracles were happening all the time, they would lose their value of evidencing the message if they were happening all the time. And if you know your Bible well, you know that it's not the case that there's a miracle every 6 years. No, in fact, there's really only 3 time periods where miraculous stuff is going on. Within that 1,500-year period over which the Bible was written, there's really only 3 small time periods within that where a whole bunch of miracles were taking place. So it's almost like 3 periods. The first period, all these miracles are taking place, and then no miracles for hundreds of years. And then boom, second period, short, maybe a few decades, all these miracles taking place, and then nothing for hundreds of years. And then a third short period of just a few decades where all these miracles are taking place. So it's not a consistent linear, one miracle every 6 years. No, there's only 3 smaller periods where there's a lot of miracles. And you know what was taking place during those 3 periods? Those 3 shorter periods where all the miracles were happening? New scripture was being written. In other words, those miracles were done. The first period of time was during Moses. Obviously, we know those miracles. We talk about them all the time, parting the Red Sea, all the miracles that Moses did. Because why? He was writing the first part of the Bible. The second time a lot of miracles took place, Elijah, Elisha, the time of the prophets, doing a lot of miracles because new scripture was being written. And the miracles were done to authenticate these prophets they really had messages from God. The miracle served that purpose. And then, of course, the third era, Jesus and the apostles. Now, oftentimes, especially, when I present these things at churches, I get some pushback from Christians. Because what this implies, maybe you've already picked this up, but what this implies is that there aren't any miracles taking place today. And some Christians push back strongly against that idea. So I want to throw that out to you before you attack me. You guys can talk about it together at your tables. Do you think there are miracles happening today? And again, how would you defend your answer? If you say no, got to give reasons why. If you say yes, defend your answer. So I'll let you guys talk about that at your tables for a few minutes here. Okay. You've probably heard the saying, he who gets to define the terms wins the argument. Have you heard that saying before? He who gets to define the terms automatically wins the argument. And so I would say no to that question, and Christians oftentimes disagree with me, and that's fine. However, remember, in this context at least, how we're defining a miracle. In this context, and I think I can make a good case for this definition, a miracle is a supernatural act. In other words, it comes from outside of nature. It's God who is supernatural, outside of nature, doing something that suspends the laws of nature, breaks the laws of nature. There's a lot of discussion here about exactly how miracles function or are related to the laws of nature. But for tonight, I think it's simple enough just to say suspends the laws of nature. To confirm a message is really from God. That's the last part of that definition is what I want to hone in on. I think a good case can be made that the definition of a miracle is specifically, it specifically serves this function or this role of confirming that a message really is from God. Okay? So obviously, when my child was born, that was amazing. When all of my children were born, I found it very amazing. And we used the term miracle, but we used it in a very colloquial way. We weren't using it in this precise definition way. So, when the day you met your wife or your husband, if you want to call that a miracle, I'm not going to harass you about it. But in this context, we need to be a little bit more precise in our definitions. That technically those wouldn't be a miracle. What about supernatural things that happen today? I would be open to that. Again, I'm a skeptic by nature, so I would want to see a lot of evidence before I would believe it. I'm open to God doing supernatural things today. But I still, even if God did something supernatural, let's say, I wouldn't call it a miracle because, again, in this context, and I think we can make a good case for it, a miracle is something that confirms a message is from God. So if God did something or he gave the ability to somebody to do something supernatural and they were also claiming to have a message from God, then I think it would be considered a miracle. But if somebody experienced something supernatural but it wasn't to confirm a message from God, we could call it a supernatural thing, but I wouldn't call it a miracle if we're using this precise definition, which I think is the correct definition of a miracle. At least if you're a Christian, that's how the Bible seems to describe the function and role of miracles throughout Scripture. So, let me give you a preview of where we're going for the rest of the semester then. I think then this bottom line, and this is how John Locke argued, and many others before and after John Locke, I just keep using that name because he's really well known for this argument. The amount and the quality of evidence for Jesus' miracles far exceeds that of any other belief system. So when I talk to, let's say, other theistic religions, I have great conversations with Mormons sometimes because they, claim that they have a message from God that's separate from the Scripture, the Bible, as we understand it. Muslims, of course, would claim to have a message from God. This is my key question that I always ask them, because again, I'm open to it. If we're theists, if we believe that God would communicate to us, that seems a reasonable assumption, then and there's all these claims out there that people have books or messages from God. How do we know which ones are really from God, which ones aren't? I think miracles is the answer. So I'm open to the Mormon, I'm open to the Muslim. What evidence do you have? Do you have any miraculous signs that confirm this really is from God? And I'm open to look at their evidence. I think we should be if we're going to be consistent and fair. And here's the thing that we're going to press into the semester is that Christianity has the amount and the quality of the evidence for our miraculous claims far surpass any other belief systems. And that's what we're going to be focusing on, is looking at those miracles and the evidence for them. As I said before, there's a semester coming in the future where we'll evaluate other religions respectfully and carefully. But this semester we're focusing on making the case, the positive case, if you will, that Jesus was God, by focusing on the evidence of his miracles. Now, you might think to yourself, miracles? Come on. Seriously? Miracles are impossible. Miracles can't happen. So maybe you're thinking that yourself, or maybe you've encountered that objection, that miracles are just flat out, they've been disproven by science, it's impossible. I don't even want to hear any evidence for miracles because it's impossible. I don't even need to look at the evidence because I just know it's not possible for a miracle to happen. How would you respond to that? Do you believe miracles are possible? And again, you have to defend your answer. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to discuss that. Do you think miracles are possible? Yes or no? All right, well, this is such an important issue. I mean, our whole argument here rests on at least the possibility of the miraculous, right? Because if miracles are impossible, our argument falls flat. Or if somebody that we're conversing with, respectfully as friends, and we're trying to make the case for Jesus being God, and they flat out reject even the possibility of miracles, well, then our argument falls flat. So this is a very important hinge or cardinal, if you will, to our argument. The possibility of miracles, okay? And this is so important to our argument that we're going to spend 3 weeks on this issue, okay? So going back to the overall outline for the semester, we're going to spend 3 weeks tackling this issue, making the case that we should at least be open to the possibility of miracles. That's different than saying we have to believe every miracle claim we encounter. No, we don't want to be like that, gullible, naive. However, we can't, I don't think, go to the other extreme and claim that miracles are impossible. I think that's too much of a leap, too much of an extreme position. So we're going to spend 3 weeks on this issue. I'm going to give probably the first lecture. We don't know the order here, but 3 of us are going to do this. I'm going to make a case, maybe more of a philosophical case, for the possibility of miracles. Wesley is going to give a lecture here about biases. Sometimes people come to this with certain biases, maybe for or against. And we want to wrestle with those presuppositions or biases, deal with those in our own thinking. And then we're also going to bring in a science professor from the University of Nebraska and have him address the question, the last one, does science prove miracles are impossible? Because you'll get that claim a lot, right? Science has proven miracles just can't happen. So I'm not a professional scientist. Sometimes the science can go over my head, but I'm very skeptical of that claim that science has disproven miracles. However, I think it'd provide more gravitas, if you will, if a science professor came here and addressed that question. So you might know Dr. Greg Bashford. We've invited him to speak on this issue. He's our faculty advisor and has been a science professor at UNL for quite a while. So I'm looking forward to that. Let me wrap up tonight then, just giving you a preview of where we're going with this argument. If we make our case well, then we should be open to miracles, right? The next thing, again, I apologize for the small font, but if you can read it up there, I think the next question to ask is, well, how do we know about Jesus' claim to be God? How do we know about his miracles, right? I mean, it is different than somebody just coming up to us on the street, right? Maybe their friend Josh, claiming that their friend Josh is God. This is somebody who lived 2,000 years ago. So how do we know about Jesus' claim to be God? How do we know that he really did these miracles? The answer to the question is, well, mostly from the New Testament. Not exclusively, as we'll see. There's a lot of extra biblical sources and lines of evidence for both these things, his claim to be God and his miracles. But mostly we know about those things from the New Testament. So this is going to take us down a path of asking the question, are the New Testament documents historically reliable, and are they accurate? Now this is going to be strange to some of you. You might have got a little bit of an inkling of it in the video. But when we do this semester, we're going to be evaluating the New Testament not as God's Word. Okay, if you're a Christian. If you're a Christian, you probably believe that the Bible is God's Word, and we're not going to challenge that. But we're going to be evaluating it simply as a collection of historical documents, which if you're a Christian, you believe that's true. They're ancient documents, right, from history. So we can evaluate them at that level, right? If you're a Christian, you might think that they're more than that, and we'll spend the semester on that someday. But at a minimum, as a Christian, right, you should think that they are ancient documents, and I think it's worthwhile evaluating them at that level with our historian hats on. And so we'll be evaluating the New Testament, not just assuming it's true because it's God's Word, but evaluating it like professional historians do, and in fact looking at a lot of work by professional historians to try to answer this question. The New Testament documents, which record Jesus' claim to be God, which record his miracles, can those ancient documents be trusted? And this will obviously take us several weeks of trying to answer these questions. First, do we have an accurate copy of the original New Testament? The Bible that we use, the New Testament that we use for maybe our devotions or on church on Sundays, is it an accurate copy? Or has it been corrupted over the centuries? And then the second question we'll have to answer is there any evidence that the New Testament authors told the truth? Because even if we have an accurate copy, even if we have a good copy of the original, we don't have the original, by the way, all we have are copies, but even if we have a good, accurate copy that's very close to the original, it might be an accurate copy of a bunch of lies. So we have to go further than making the case that we have an accurate copy of the original New Testament. We have to make the case that they actually told the truth. And so that's the work ahead of us this semester. We'll end up then making this case for the historical reliability of the New Testament, because that's mostly, as we'll see again, not exclusively, but that's mostly where we know about his claim to be God and his miracles. And so we want to evaluate them to see if they're trustworthy evidence. Now, I apologize that the font is so small. What I'm going to do is print this out on one piece of paper so you can always have this before you, so you don't get lost in the conversation and kind of track with us where we're at through the semester. But this is where we're going. This is what we're doing this semester, and I am super excited about it. Let me wrap up and we'll take a few minutes for Q&A. These are different ways you can get involved with Ratio Christi. Grace covered them at the beginning. I won't mention them again. And then, of course, our next Monday monthly meeting is coming up in a few weeks. And if you weren't here for last semester, this would be a great time to join us to review why we think that God exists. And you'll see when I give my lecture about the possibility of miracles that it's absolutely critical that we make the argument that there is a God first before we argue for miracles. You can probably see already how the two are related. So arguing for God, making the case that there is a supreme being is something we want to do first before we argue for the possibility of miracles. So I'll leave this up on the board if you want to think about different ways to get involved with Ratio Christi. But what questions do you guys have about tonight? Did you get a chance to look up that guy's name or what he does?
Yeah, it's Robert and Price.
Okay. Robert Price. And what's his background or what is his credentials? He is? Okay. Well, I stand corrected if that's the case. It's even if there are, one or more scholars that, let me repeat the question. So earlier when we were talking about are there any scholars who argue that Jesus never existed, I made the claim that there aren't any professional scholars or academics who make that case. That was an empirical claim. I had never seen one. Most people that I talked to in this area claim to have never seen one. But it sounds like there might be at least one out there, maybe more, who make that case. So we want to be fair to the empirical evidence. But even if there are academics, scholars who are making that case, I think it's safe to say it's a very extreme position. And again, I would refer folks to Bart Ehrman's book, where as an atheist, he lays out all the evidence we have that Jesus existed, at least the human Jesus. Of course, Ehrman doesn't believe Jesus was God. He's an atheist.
What was that name?
Bart Ehrman. Let me bring it up. But Wesley, why don't you, while I'm doing that, why don't you let somebody ask the next question?
Any other questions? Yeah.
That's the book I was referring to.
This is probably an easy one, but you implied or you said that Jesus did miracles so that people know there was a Messiah, God. Why in the Synoptic Gospels differentiate? Because there's a little bit of a controversy that it's different than John in this regard, but Jesus seems to, after every time he does a miracle, he says, "Don't go, don't tell anyone." Is that just to keep the hordes away from him, or
Yeah.
if the goal is to let people know?
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair question. I'll repeat it for you guys. All heard it well with that mic, but in terms of the recording, they asked me to repeat the question. So there seems to be in the Gospels, at least the Synoptic Gospels, this idea, or what comes across in the narrative, is that when Jesus does miraculous things, he immediately afterwards tells a lot of his disciples, or tells people not to let folks know, or almost seems like he's trying to hide his divinity. And so if the purpose of his miracles were to give evidence for his divinity, it seems contradictory for him to do that. And I would affirm that. I would agree that seems strange. And there's a lot of theological speculation as to why he did that. We can try to probe his motives and speculate, even like you did. Maybe it was to keep the hordes away, or the paparazzi away. That's one possibility. Another possibility, and this does seem to come out of the text sometimes, is that it seems as though Jesus wanted to control or have a little bit of have a little bit more control about when his ministry was announced, or how his ministry was announced, or even who he was. He seems to be even really dodgy sometimes. This goes back to something that might be even deeper than your question. Why didn't he just come out and more explicitly say that he was God? The video wrestled with this a little bit. Why didn't he just use those terms? If he wanted everybody to know, why wasn't he more explicit about it? Well, it seems like there were a lot of times where he was either implicit or even hiding the idea that he was God. So why would he do that? And again, possibilities. We could speculate his motives as to why he was doing that. Does anybody have any thoughts or ideas, or even from the text, something that you can remember as to why Jesus might have done that? What would be a reason why he might? I'll throw it out to you guys. Maybe it was too much, too quick.
Yeah.
Right? That would make sense. Think about, back to my example, how jarring it would be if somebody came up to me on the street and said they were God. That would be, I would have so much skepticism. It would lead me maybe not even to be open to entertain the possibility, because I would just be so jarred by it. However, if they approached me and slowly I got to see, maybe not so upfront or aggressively, but more in a more gentle or slow way, they allowed me to see their miracles and their kindness and how they lived, and then that would cause me to be more open to it at the end. We're speculating here. I don't know if there's a right answer, but
I think it could also honestly further prove just like the validity of Jesus' testimony about like who he was, because he's doing all these things. He's not outrightly coming and saying things, and he's doing these things kind of in private, and yet like tons of people are still catching on and following, and you know what I mean? Like it kind of seems like a God thing, but that's just happening in general. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense.
I think so.
My other answer is reverse psychology.
Oh. Maybe.
That's just like a funny answer. Don't be so serious.
No, I follow you. I see where you're going. Another thought that I had too was
Or he's like not claiming the credit, but he gets the credit anyway. So.
Another thought that I had was maybe a theological motive. There are some times where Jesus talks about hiding truth from people, and that comes across very jarring, especially those of us that are Christians, and we think about, well, why would Jesus want to hide truth from people? But it seems to be done, again, a little bit of speculation on our part, but it seems like there's a theological motivation there, because as we as Christians would understand it, the more truth somebody's revealed to, the more accountable they are for rejecting it. So if Jesus, being omniscient, knows who's going to trust him and who's going to reject him, maybe sometimes it was an act of mercy that he didn't allow people to know as much information, because with greater light, like Spider-Man's mentor said, with greater responsibility, or with greater power comes greater responsibility. With greater truth, you're more responsible to how you respond to that truth then. Again, speculating here, but go ahead.
Just a thought on that. I feel like I've maybe heard this or seen this written before, so I'm not sure where, but do you think it ties into Jesus' time not, him saying that his time had not come yet with regards to his crucifixion? Do you think he was trying to control that?
Yeah, and even, kind of what he told his mom, if we believe the gospel narratives are historically reliable, and we'll make the case for that. I'm assuming a lot of things tonight for the sake of conversation. We're going to make a case for the historical reliability of the New Testament. But if we, think that they are historically reliable, then even, his first miracle, changing the water into wine, what did he tell his mother? That miracle, my time hasn't come yet. So there was he wanted to, to be, seems like, in control of the information about him, how it was going to be released, how it was going to be known, how it was going to be what his motivations were for that. And, going back to what I said about some of his statements weren't explicitly a claim to deity, they were more implicit. I think the video did a good job showing that to the first century ears, some of his claims were overtly explicit. Like in John 8, where he says, before Abraham was, I am. I mean, he's claiming to be the great I am. And to Jewish ears in the first century, I mean, they knew immediately what he was claiming. That might be lost on us 2,000 years later as Westerners, but for first century Jews, they would know exactly what he meant by claiming to be the great I am, because that was how God described himself to Moses.
Just why do you think they didn't mention that?
I don't know. I find that one to be the most compelling myself, but I'm not sure why the video creator chose not to mention that one. All right, any other questions? I hope you at least all have the flow of the argument in your mind now. We've got a lot of details to fill in. That's what we do here at Ratio Christi. But at least now you kind of know where we're going. You understand the case that we're making. Whether or not we do our job well, that'll be for you to decide. But you at least now know how we're going to be going about it. Well, I'll turn it over to you guys at the tables now. All those 3, 4, 5-minute conversations throughout the night are just intended to get the ball rolling. So, as always, you guys are welcome to stay here and chat. There's more food, more soda, I believe, more water. So keep those conversations going at the table. Talk about these issues. Defend your positions with love and respect. And thank you guys for coming tonight.